Hello, Future Tribe. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. On this week's episode, I've got Rae Knopik from CBR Gals or Canberra Gals. How are you today, Rae?
Great. Thanks for having me.
No worries. It's really good to have you. One of our first guests was Georgie from the Women's Collective, and when I saw your name pop up and what you guys do, I sort of thought, there's some synergies there, I'm sure, between what the Women's Collective do or used to do, and then what you guys do. Tell me a bit more about what you aim to do.
Great. Thank you. The Canberra Gals Network is a feminist not-for-profit organization that focuses on enabling every Canberran woman to be more in her personal and professional capacities and to connect to the greater ACT area through inclusive events. So, long story short, events-based not-for-profit for women.
Right. Okay. So very like completely events based, or just majority events based, or how do
We like to
you?
create events through social media and through like in-person, face-to-face meetings.
Right. Right. How are you tackling COVID-19 and everything that we're sort of facing at the moment? Then.
It's a great question. And when lockdown started happening in Canberra, anyone who's in events would kind of say, oh gosh, what are we going to do? How are we going to survive? But this was a really meaningful time for us to be there for our network. And what that meant was creating creative online events where people could still meet and connect in a meaningful way. But it got a bit tricky, right? Because Zoom exhaustion is real,
Mm-hmm.
and going to a happy hour is really different than having a glass of wine or a bevy with 40 other little tiles. So we decided to get creative with it. And every happy hour that we've had virtually, we actually deliver a goodie bag full of local kind of nibbles and drinks from local women-run brands to their doors. So we're all kind of eating the same things and drinking the same bubbles to kind of create that atmosphere at home.
Nice, nice. So it's really been a time to experiment and innovate, one could say, in how you deliver events. Now, are you sort of thinking when things go back to normal? I'm sure you can't replace like in-person connections, especially when it comes to networking. But do you think there'll be an element of virtual connections for, let's say, Canberrans who've gone overseas on a posting for 3 years? Or have you thought about that, or is it still early days in terms of working out how you deliver in a post-COVID sort of scenario?
Well, at the Canberra Gals Network, we really try to turn all feedback into quantitative metrics. So, what our metrics have been finding from these events is that people love the virtual events, and there are women in Canberra, we're neighbors, who wouldn't necessarily go to an in-person happy hour, but are perfectly happy meeting online. So because of that reason, we found that these virtual events actually add a level of inclusivity that we didn't have previously. So they're here to
Mhm.
stay for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you raise a good point, because if you're a mother, or had a pet, or had some reason why you couldn't get out of the house, this or just didn't have a car, let's say, that this sort of breaks down those barriers, because you can sort of hop on, and I guess it also removes an aspect or an element of, how am I going to present myself? Do I have, really nice clothes and jewelry? But you sort of remove that to an extent, don't you, when you sort of have to meet virtually, because it's almost in the control of, I mean, right now you could just turn off your screen and that's it. Like there's nothing that I can do. So it almost gives the power back to the people attending, rather than having those social pressures that might be felt.
And that's absolutely right, Jermaine. And in addition to that, we learned very recently that a lot of the people involved with this network don't drink. And so a
Hmm.
happy hour wouldn't necessarily be something that's super interesting to them, of interest. So in those kinds of goodie bags, we actually offer non-alcoholic beverages, and they feel like this is the best event for some people. They feel
Yeah.
this is great because it removes that kind of extra barrier as well. So virtual events definitely here to stay. We're excited to get back into face-to-face as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, again, that's another very good point. Like, I found myself sort of, especially coming right out of school, where a lot of people, enjoyed their drinking. I didn't enjoy it so much, and that often left me a little bit isolated. And not in like that they obviously don't mean it in that way, but if you don't partake in those activities, um, to the full extent that others might, then it does isolate you in some way, shape, or form, whether it's intentional or not. So, yeah, it sounds like it's been an interesting time for you guys, and you've sort of almost found a different offering that can sit alongside what you used to do and what you'll do hopefully moving forward. So, when did you start this whole endeavor?
We will be 2 in November of this year.
Okay, so about a year and a half, or getting close to 2 years now. You don't have an Australian accent. Don't mean to single you out, but give me an idea of how old you are now. How old you were when you? I mean, did you come to Canberra, or did you just grow up in Canberra with sort of an American sounding accent? I might be wrong.
No, I
Tell me
am,
a little bit about yourself.
thanks, Jermaine. I am a Floridian, born and bred. After uni, I moved to Italy for 2 years, Florence to be specific. I met my partner there, and he's from Canberra. When he
Okay.
returned back to Canberra, he invited me to come and see where he lives, and I did, and I never left. So that was 2 years ago in 2018. I had just turned 23. I'm
Mhm.
25 now, and I've been here ever since.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So, what made you start this whole thing? Like being, was it sort of a being new to Canberra? I need something like this. Why don't I start it myself, sort of thing? Or
It kind of was, I always tell people that I never wanted to found this organization. I just wanted it to exist. And when I came here, and if you've been in Canberra for a while, you'll see the changes that have happened to this city. And it's amazing, remarkable, even in the past 2 years, the social and infrastructure changes that are happening. It's amazing. 2 years ago, though, there was no group for women that was a casual meeting place for people just to make connections. There was always some sort of activity that you had to partake in, whether
Mhm.
it be bowling or running around the lake or things like that. And as a busy person, I found that I couldn't make those meetings. And also, I don't know if you've noticed this, but if you've ever moved to a new place and you find that it's hard to make connections, it becomes actually harder because you're not in your most confident self.
Yeah.
And so it's not like a situation where you can say, oh, I'm just going to go to a bar and meet people. If you're not in that mindset, it's very difficult. So after a while, I was looking around trying to find this organization, and I just couldn't. So I decided, okay, I'm going to just make an Instagram page and see what happens. And that's how it all started.
Wow. Okay. So about 2 years ago, you start an Instagram page. You call it
Mhm.
CBR Gals, I assume at the time as well.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
And then give us an idea of sort of what are the steps now. The My intention around asking this question is just trying to understand how you've brought it to where it is now. Like, what were the early days like? Because if there's someone who's listening who wants to start a community, and especially nowadays, I think with COVID, it's becoming even more essential, but like Facebook groups, forums, community groups, whether it's online virtual stuff or whether it's in person, I think there's this huge, I mean, even places like Reddit and Discord, what they are, to an extent, is a community, right, of people with a common sort of goal or understanding. So for anyone who's listening who wants to start that journey down that path, give us an idea of what it was like at the start, what you did, and how you were able to sort of grow, so that we can learn from what you've been able to do.
Sure. So I think that if you're listening to this and you're thinking about starting some sort of community of some kind, it's important to think about what it is you want to do and what the right thing is to do. And the more lineup you have, the more successful you will be, because goodness is recognized by everyone, mostly. And then what you want to do, if it's also what you want to do, you will pour yourself into that. And it won't matter if you're making money, it won't matter if there's millions of people following it, because it'll be your baby. and it'll be exactly what it is that you want to do. And that was the Canberra Gals for me, and still is. And it all started with this idea that it didn't matter who you were, where you were from, what you did. Every gal of every age, profession, and in every season of life could partake in this community in whatever capacity you wanted. And we would connect just based on the idea that we are women, and women together are so powerful, especially when they support each other. Women, when they support each other, magic happens.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think there like I don't know if you watch The Bachelor, and this is
I do.
people are going to judge me about this, but I was watching it yesterday and I just felt sad. Last night's episode was all like everyone was just fighting, arguing, crying, and I just felt like it was a step back for modern, like for society, just because it just it just set this wrong tone. Like I think I get it; they're competing for a guy, which just sounds weird to say. But you know, you speak about the collective power that you have, which is so true. Because I think if you take up any sort of demographic and you bring them as a collective group, they can really thrive in those situations, right? Like when I used to travel a lot when I was younger, like move a lot, and we'd always, being born in Sri Lanka, we'd always find the Sri Lankan community in the new country that
Wow.
we go to, not intentionally. You just bump into, like, genuinely, we found the Sri Lankan community in Canberra because we went to church, and there was a guy, dad was like, he looks Sri Lankan, I'm gonna go say hi, and that was it. Like, that was it.
I
It
love
wasn't
that.
like, yeah, it wasn't, I'm going to go on Google, I'm going to go on Facebook, try and find a Sri Lankan group. But all that's to say is that, when you come into a group, whether it's women or whether it's Sri Lankans or whether it's people with black hair, whatever the group it is, you can really create this environment where everyone's comfortable and everyone can really thrive. But yeah, I don't know why I mentioned The Bachelor, but I think it was because I'm just still disappointed about sort of how everything was portrayed yesterday on last night's show. There's just a lot of crying. Anyway, but okay, not losing track of what we're talking about. So you started the Instagram page. So you started connecting with people, I would assume, and then did you find that people were messaging you, or what was that next stage? And when did you have your first event, or why did you, like, was events going to be the ultimate goal when you started the Instagram page in the first place, or how did that happen?
I had a feeling that it would be. I always start projects with the goal in mind, or the end in mind. That's really the goal. And I always imagined women getting together in this kind of way, like just to, let's meet, let's just have a good time. And so I imagined it would be that way. But actually, Jermaine, it took me so long, and by so long, I mean about 3 or 4 months, to gain the courage to actually put that first event out there,
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't tell anyone that I was doing this. Not my friends that I had made here. My partner knew, of course, because he was the one cheering me on. But I didn't tell anyone because I was so afraid that somebody would turn to me and say, how could you start a page called the Canberra Gals? You're not even from Canberra.
Yeah,
You're not even
Canberra.
Australian.
Yeah.
What gives you the right? And when you're starting something new, you just want to keep going. You just want the momentum, right? You don't want anyone to tell you you can't do this, because everything's so scary and everything's so big that you feel like you might crumble under that. And that's how I felt. So it took until February of 2019, a few months after I started the page, for me to actually get the guts, put it on Meetup, put it on a Facebook event, make it a free happy hour. Just come buy a drink, like, not going to charge you anything.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just going to get together. And I had no idea how many people were going to show up. People RSVP'd, but with a free event, you can just decide you're not going to at the last moment.
Exactly. Which I used to be involved with events and sort of marketing for a big business, I you guess you would call it. And it's very true. Like, having a free event, I think there were times that we were getting like a 10% turn up rate. So because it's so easy to click, and so we're still talking like 300 people said they'd come, and we prepped for like 80 and we'd get 40. So it wasn't sort of too crazy, because I think 300 people, I don't think the venues would have even
A lot,
held
right.
300 people. But it
Right.
is a good point that you raise. Like, you can just hit, okay, I'm going to go. And events take a lot of organizing, but it sounds like what you did was you lowered everyone else's barrier to entry, which makes it much easier. And then
Mhm.
you lowered sort of what you were attempting to do with the first one. So it's almost like a proof of concept rather than, this amazing conference over 3 days and you had to organize every single moving part.
Right.
So is that sort of a tip there, that you just want to, just test the waters initially?
I think that that's a really good tip, for sure. To just test the water, see interest, see who might want to do this, but also be very clear with your marketing, what you're doing. And we had 12 people come to the first event, and for me, I created the page because I wanted to change one person's life,
Mhm.
and other than my own. I would already change mine. I knew that, but if I had just made a difference for one person, it would have been worth it. But for all 12 people to RSVP and then come, I was thinking to myself, okay, like this is needed and I can do free events. Like this is not a big deal. It's bringing people into a venue that may have not had people on a Tuesday night. People are out spending money, which is great for the economy. And we're connecting on something that's bigger than ourselves, something that will have a legacy later on. So I would say if you're thinking about doing events of some kind, be very clear about what the event is and what people can expect, and then just let the rest happen.
Yeah, and if it's a proof of concept, all you've got to deliver as an event organizer, all that is within your control. So, if you say, all it is going to be is you turn up, I've booked a table, and you buy yourself a drink, and you sit down and we talk. That's pretty easy to deliver.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
you
that's a
know,
good point. Be clear on the marketing and then deliver.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And set the bar as low as possible, that it's still something, but so it's higher than what someone would be able to just do by themselves. And what you then do is really facilitate the coming together of people. Now that can, as you've found, now it's with the virtual stuff, it might also then evolve to facilitate the delivery of goodies and nibbles. It might be booking an event. I know that a lot of people nowadays, one, they're busy, but two, probably because they're busy and maybe because they're lazy, they just, the last thing they want to do is organize things for themselves. Like,
Right.
I want to catch up with friends, but I'm not going to organize past sort of messaging one person being like, hey, do you want to catch up for lunch? And that would be it. And so what you've been able to do at the core is to bring and facilitate those groups of people. Now, as you sort of started to get momentum, what sort of business structures, or did you, I think you mentioned that you're a not for profit. Are you like a registered not for profit, or?
Yeah, so in oh gosh, it was about a year ago now. We had just hosted our first panel, and the reason why this is important is because before we were hosting happy hours, we were hosting events called clothing swaps, which I'll get into later, and we were hosting mostly fun, very what I would classify as feminine things,
Mhm.
just to do for fun, and
Like social
we
events, really?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But we would do like very photographic picnics up at Mount Stromlo with
Hmm.
gorgeous grazing boards and photo shoots and things like that of that nature.
Instagrammable, just sort
Yeah,
of, really. I mean, it's not. I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just
yeah,
it's what your target group wants to do, and that's
absolutely. Yeah,
that's awesome. And it
absolutely.
probably helps being in the target group as well, because you sort of can go, oh, I want to do that. Well, I'm sure everyone else wants to do it. Let's do it. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry, I got you
absolutely.
off. Keep going.
So we decided to host this panel, and it was called the Moment of Yes. And the idea was when five powerful Canberran women had found their calling, that moment of yes, I did it.
Mhm.
And I was at the time working alone, and I basically cold called anyone I knew of. I didn't know anyone. I had no contacts when I came here except for my partner. And I called everyone that I knew of and was just like, we're doing this panel. It's going to happen in a month. Would you be interested? This is kind of the idea. And I reached for people like Julia Gillard, like people that I knew that I probably wouldn't be able to get a hold of. And I reached for local people like Trish Bergen, who at the time was the first assistant secretary for the Office of Women, who I also knew because she lived nearby me. So I thought that we might have that connection.
Mm.
So there was a range of people, right? I had an okay chance of maybe getting, and then probably not. I will tell you, Jermaine, over the coming months, although not everyone responded right away, every single person responded and said, this is
Wow.
something that I would love to do.
Wow.
And so that for me was a big wake up call, because I was thinking to myself, it's not just me. I'm not in this echo chamber of this is awesome,
Yeah.
This was a moment for me of yes, when I realized that this is something that's very important. This is something that is much bigger than me. It's something that's much bigger than just the people that were on that panel. What do we do with it? What do we do? And this was also the first event that people paid for. Every
Mm.
other event up until that point was completely free to attend. So we had to decide what we were going to do with finances, and how we were going to be responsible to keep the integrity of what we had built. And that was when I, in collaboration with my partner, decided that we would move into the not-for-profit field. And we had no idea what we were doing. We got a lot of advice. We tossed up whether to be a social equity startup or a not-for-profit, and we ultimately ended up deciding that the integrity of what we had built was a not-for-profit. So we took about 2 months to fill all of the paperwork, became incorporated, and then started building our board of people. Now, what was interesting is that the board pretty much assembled based on interest. So who was there at the time? And Shannon Beckwith, who had been at every event, she had helped me really from early days. I think I had just hosted the first event, and then she came on and wanted to help with everything. We had no experience between the two of us, but we were ready to learn, and we were ready to build this thing that was going to be bigger than us. So she became my vice president and still is of the board. And then the team assembled from that. And since that day, we've been a not-for-profit made of a completely volunteer board,
Mm.
with the president, secretary, treasurer, and vice president.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So, has that been about 12 months, did you say?
Yes.
Has that allowed you to, has that changed sort of how you can, how you do what you do to an extent, like having that, that structure around you? Do you think that's added anything, or do you think it was more, just nice to get that sort of legal standing, and legal establishment? What sort of changed since then, do you think?
Well, what's been so amazing is that we were really particular about who would come onto the board. And the reason for that was because I had read so many horror stories of, gosh, what is it called? There's a word for this in not-for-profit world, where you build your board around friends and family.
Hmm.
And because of that, your board gets lazy because they don't feel like they have to contribute anything. So I decided to build a board based on the best people available. And what that has created is an amazing network. Sorry, my phone keeps going off. Sorry about
That's
that.
all right.
An amazing network of individuals who bring so much to the table. So, for example, you have me, you have Shannon. Shannon is Chilean Australian and brings a wealth of experience from living all over the planet. Declan Norrie, who is my partner, is the treasurer of the board. He's also the most qualified person for numbers that I could imagine. And he brings a male perspective, which is very interesting and so valid because, as a male feminist for change, he brings that perspective of how can we still be inclusive for everyone while still affecting change in Canberra. And then finally, we have Ruhi Asher, who's the secretary of the board, who grew up in the UK. So she brings another rich international experience to this, and also an element of, I understand what it's like to be on the outside of things, what it's like to be an outsider, and how do we create a more inclusive environment for everyone. So it's been wonderful to have this team working on this with me because they bring such a wealth of different experiences. Yes, we're all young, but we're also ready to see real changes in Canberra and the world.
Yeah, that's amazing. And like you said, bringing that, what I loved hearing, when you were mentioning that there are, I mean, part of your board is a person who's not even a female, and then there's people who are from overseas, or everyone's from overseas, that or grew up in Australia for a little bit, perhaps, but what they already know is what it is like to be a bit of an outsider. Feel not quite like you fit in, because it's easy to fit in when everyone has the same accent, everyone has the same hair color, or whatever it may be, or the same upbringing. So what you can then do, obviously, with this team is create scenarios and situations where everyone feels accepted, because you go in without any sort of prejudice around things. Now, you mentioned your partner who is involved with what you guys do. I've got a bit of a interesting question for you, and you probably get this, but I find that there aren't many groups like this for men. Um, has he ever felt that? Have you ever had this conversation with him? Why do you think aren't groups like this for men? Or perhaps there are, and I've never heard of them.
Oh, it's such a good question. And it's actually something that we've discussed since the beginning of the Canberra Gals. At the very first Canberra Gals happy hour, I love to tell this story. He came to the bar with a couple of his guy friends to make sure that people showed up, and if they didn't, be there.
Mhm.
And he would always joke to say, "We're going to start the Canberra Guys Network." That has not happened yet, but I would love to see that happen one day, because I think that there's so many. Um, there are groups that form around sport, but you run into the same exact problems that toxic women groups can have. You can have them in male groups as well. And one group that I would love to see happen for Canberra, for men, would be around like an actual friendship based group that, how do I say this? Doesn't contribute to the lack of emotional connections, because I feel like male relationships are so different because there's so many stigmas around sharing how you're feeling and what is actually going on in your life, that I would love to see like real connections form and real change happen within male culture, which would be a really difficult group to host, but I hope to see it happen one day. It'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, I've gone down this road myself. When I was at the University of Canberra, I was sort of part of the initial group that founded the Entrepreneurship Society at UC, and that experience alone, let alone everything else that I've sort of experienced, has shown me how difficult it can be to create groups like this. But then you take, for better or worse, sort of the mindset around a lot of men, and you get scenarios where when you bringing them into groups, it can sometimes bring out the toxic. It happens in all sorts of groups. I can even think of, even talking about, say, a group of Sri Lankans. I can see how, they all get together all the time, and then suddenly because they share something in common, that might be toxic from the outside, but for them it isn't, because it's what they've grown up with.
Isn't that
And
interesting?
like, inevitably you end up with something that's toxic, but only, it's not really toxic, it's just because it's exaggerated, supported, and then encouraged within that group, because it is accepted within that group.
Yeah.
And so bringing sort of men into this sort of equation and conversation, there are a number of things that I can see that can, for worse, really, get exaggerated. And then you talked about real connection. I for some reason, and I would love to be part of some group that changes this, but I don't see, um the group getting really around exaggerated, like, talking about
No.
feelings. It's probably going to
It'd
be
be
around,
great.
yeah,
Yeah.
like, it'd be awesome, but it's probably going to be
Yeah.
around, like, cars and street racing, or drinking, or gambling. And this is not to say that that's what all guys do, but there is always that risk, and like you mentioned, it's got to be very carefully managed, because guys, for better or worse, I think can sometimes get a little bit carried away with something, and go take that one step too far. Like, do 140 k's an hour in an 80 street, when you're going for a cruise with your mates, because you think it'll be the cool thing to do. So it does bring that sort of dimension of difficulty. But like you, I'd love to see something like that happen, I think, because
Yeah, and it could be those activities as well that contribute to it. But what I'm thinking more of is I'd love to see men can be so guarded, and women aren't really like this. They can be, of course, but if you get women together and you talk about a specific problem, they're more willing, I find, in my experience, to share their personal experiences. And for men, that's much harder to do because we have these societal culture of I'm going to tell you something, but I'm not going to actually share. I'm going to hold back a bit. And I
yeah.
don't think that this is good for men, because the emotions then that they bring into later in life when they have more confidence, they bring to their partners, they bring to their kids. And it kind of just all comes out at once. This comes later in life, but how can we kind of prevent that from happening? Can we create stronger connections with men without a stigma of I can't talk about things that are going on? Do you find that that's something that has happened?
Completely. I mean,
Yeah.
what this brings out in me is, so I think I'm an introvert. Most people disagree with that, but I also like to have genuine conversations. And now it's nothing forced. It's just something that I like to get into the actual nitty-gritty stuff. And it's never going to be me saying, tell me, I like all the bad things happening in your life and unravel to me. It's just more, let's have an actual conversation. And
Mm.
um funny enough, having that approach, I've heard it from partners, I've heard it from friends. The response to that tends to be, wow, you, first of all, you like to talk a lot, but second, you also like talk about like you really get in there sort of, and it's almost like this weird thing, like it's almost treated as like this is peculiar. Like we moved recently, about I was in February, and I know both neighbors really well. Um, and my partner is a little bit like I think she's spoken to one of them maybe, but like I know what they do for work, how many kids they have, what their partners do. Like I know everything. But it
Well,
is seen. Sorry.
that's lovely.
Oh, it's awesome, and I enjoy it, but I think it is definitely seen as a little bit of like, I don't want to say weird, but not what people expect
That's the
out of a
norm.
guy.
And why not? And why
And that's
not?
what I don't understand. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like, why can't guys have this conversation? That like, what, I think you would probably. Is it fair to say that you'd be surprised if a guy came up to you and had a conversation to you in a similar style that you would have with one of your sort of female friends? Is
Yeah.
that
It
fair to
is
say?
terrible. And most women would assume they're being hit on, which is terrible, right? Because the culture puts men in this box of what they can and cannot share. And that's not good for men. It's not good for women either. It's not good for anyone.
It's really not good for anyone, exactly, because what we're talking about is compartmentalizing and then just not sort of really reflecting your true self,
Absolutely.
which you just end up either putting away and then forgetting that, like, you're a guy, but you're also a human being, um, or it just gets worse and worse and worse, and then one day you just have a meltdown, or have a midlife crisis, and
Life
they're so
crisis.
normalized, aren't they?
Yeah.
Like, and
Yeah.
it's just a sad thing, but perhaps something that I can get involved in and try and change. Now, let's get into, we've talked about the awesome stuff that you've been able to do. Do any mistakes come to mind, or things that you've done that, next time around it'll just be easier to avoid than to do again?
Um, you know, I I have a hard time talking about mistakes because I learn from them, and the Canberra Gals would not be what it is without those mistakes. So I wouldn't change them. But I will talk about a huge error that I personally was responsible for last month when we were creating the Connect Up Gala. And this was an in-person gala that was for 100 people at Hotel Realm. Now, there was a grant created by a government body here in Canberra for event makers like us to create events for Canberrans. So we applied to this grant, and Jermaine, we assumed we would get it. Like it was one of those situations where we made a gala that would cost $20,000 to create for 100 people, and it would have all of these beautiful things. It would bring in all of these vendors, local vendors at Hotel Realm. People get frocked up. There's a photo wall. There's live music. There's giveaways and
Yeah.
auction items
It's
and
like a
all
real
that.
event.
A real event,
Yeah.
right in COVID. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we submitted that grant application mid-June, I think, and they would let us know mid-July. But the event was going to be on for the 25th of July. And so that meant we had to get started before we knew, right?
Yeah.
And I think that you're going to be able to tell how the story goes, but we did not get the grant. And we're about 2 weeks out and $20,000 down. We'd already sold 50% of our tickets way below the price of what it would cost to actually attend the event. The cost per head was about $150, and people were paying $100 or less.
Mm-hmm.
So we found ourselves in this position of, if you're a not-for-profit board, nobody owns the company. It's not like a standard for-profit company where you can go into debt and foreclose. If the not-for-profit owes money, the board is responsible to pay.
Right. Wow.
Personally liable. And if we were to bite off more than we can chew, say for 20-something-year-olds with no money have to pay $20,000, the company would go under, and we would never be able legally, I don't remember the legal term, I guess it's not really that relevant, but we would never be able to open a company in our names in Australia again if that happened.
Wow. Yeah. So you
So
basically like get blacklisted.
Yeah. So we didn't get the grant, and we thought that we would at least get something, even if we didn't get the full 20. We thought we'd at least get something. We didn't get anything, and so we had already started moving forward. We already had 10 panelists who were pretty high-collar Canberrans that we really respected, and we wanted them to respect us, who had never heard of us before. And it was, again, one of these situations of, I really believe in what you're doing. Let's do this. And my mistake there was selling tickets with the surefire thought that we had that grant and not having a backup plan. So then basically the story does end well. We scrambled, we had to adjust ticket prices. We went to every sponsor that we could possibly think of and offered them amazing deals on advertising, and we made it work. We did.
Wow. Yeah,
And the
that's
event was
amazing.
and we actually didn't go into debt. None of those terrible things happened. We were able to move forward. But yeah, that mistake of not creating a backup budget was, I lost a lot of sleep over that. Let's just say that.
Yeah, that would have been insane. And I think the big takeaway to me is that in life, nothing's a surefire thing. So don't do things, make decisions, and act and plan as if everything's just going to happen and it's going to be like, it's good to have, I think, that positivity. Like, don't get me wrong, because like in my business every day we do stuff that we're not, like, no one goes into something saying, I'm going to work hard at this and it's going to fail. No one goes into it with that sort of approach. But you've got to always temper it with a bit of, just being realistic about it and sort of going, there's actual money involved here. There's people who actually have to cough up money. We actually have to pay all these different entities. And just never losing sight of the fact that it is real life. There are real implications, and there are real things that need to happen and real things that don't happen. So yeah, that's a massive takeaway, but it's impressive that you were able to get out of that that hole that you dug yourselves?
Well, I think that part of it too is my team, the three, Ruhi, Shannon, and Declan, are all very logical, realistic people. So
Hmm.
when I went to them and told them this, they basically said, if you don't come, because I was in charge of the budget for sponsors, if you don't come up with this much money in sponsors by this week, this time, we're cutting the cord. You're no longer allowed to do this. So they were the logic kind of there. But I think the reason, in a way, with that in mind, so you have that. But I think another reason why we were so successful is because I saw it happening. Like, it was one of those moments where I was like, I see this, it's going to happen. I don't know how, I don't know why. But I even, like, one very sleepless night, woke up and like scribbled on a piece of paper. I think the exact words were, I'm excited to see the Connect Up Gala succeed, have more sponsors than we need, and be a total hit. And so it was.
Mm.
So I think that if if you're scared, a lot's at stake, but if you have that real vision and it's really there and you see it, the Red Sea will part, so to speak, and it will happen.
Well, and envision what the final product looks like, so you know where you want to go, and then it's much easier to reverse engineer. If someone told you build me a car, that's very difficult. But if someone said, here's a car, you can actually take it apart and look at it all you want and then put it back together. Okay, it's going to be harder, but it's not impossible. So by doing that, by envisioning, okay, this is what it's going to be, I'm sure you had to reverse engineer. Like, sounds like they did the numbers, for example. Very simple, but they did the numbers and they went, okay, we are $10,000 short. You need to find, whether it's 10 different sponsors at $1,000 each, or, whatever it may be, we need to get to this mark. And by doing that, you just really map out a blueprint of how you get where you want to go. And you just got to temper it all with realism. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. That's it. And just work for it. So that's awesome. What do you guys hope to do moving forward in the next 6 to 12 months?
This is always such a beautiful question when people ask, but the goal of Canberra Gals is what it's doing. It's currently functioning exactly the way that it's supposed to. So I think that the most important thing that we do is manage the growth, because over the past 6 months alone, we've doubled in size. And so knowing how to manage that growth and still connect to people on that, like, very small 10 people happy hour one-on-one level, even
That
if there's
intimate sort of,
one in a row, yeah,
yeah, yeah.
is going to be really important. So what I think that means is more advisors to the board. We always need to be learning about this growing entity that we've created, and also having more spokespeople for the Canberra Gals, so that you can go around the room. You can have more board members basically go around the room and say, how are you going? How's the event for you? Make sure everyone feels welcome, because at the end of the day, like, Canberra Gals was created for Canberra Gals, not the board, not me, no one
Mhm.
else. So we need to make sure that we're managing the individuals that are involved with this network, and making them feel welcome and included.
Yeah, I mean, it's really exciting to be in the position that you are, and it's really smart that you're thinking about how to manage growth and do those things that I think sometimes you can forget in the excitement of it all, because managing growth isn't very fun, because it's much more fun to be like, hey guys, we're doubling every month, or whatever it is, and just sit in that success as people comment congratulations and give you all the likes and all that stuff. It's very easy to get lost in that, but it's much harder to sort of think about the real things that you've got to work on and navigate and really finesse as you grow and change, while still maintaining what it is that, especially in what you do, like you mentioned, maintaining the same level of intimacy and connectedness and conversation in a 50 people group is much more difficult and different to doing that in a 10-person group. So you've got some exciting things ahead for you. Now, where can people find out more about what you guys do?
We're on every social media as CBR Gals, or you can check out our website, cbrgales.com.
Awesome. Okay. Are you ready for the top 12?
Sure, I'm ready.
Okay, let's roll into it. So, top 3 books or podcasts that you recommend?
So I'm on a mission to read 52 books a year. I started this last year and met my goal, and this year I'm there again. So I'm a big fan of books. My favorite two books that I've read in the past decade have been The 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss, because Tim Ferriss taught me so much about creating your own dreams. And I read his book for the first time when I was probably 17. So it was really fun, foundational, and like just following your nose. And then I love Don Norman's classic design, The Design of Everyday Things. And his whole notion is that people don't see bad design, or people don't see good design. Good design is invisible because you live in this world where everything works. People only see bad design. So I love to create events and to create programs around that idea that if nobody says anything, it means it's been a total hit. People will tell you if it's bad.
Yeah, definitely.
And then my favorite podcast is probably A Drink with James by Four. And this is a podcast all about social media, specifically Instagram. And James Four founded this not-for-profit company in New York City called Fourco that helps people become influencers on social media. But it really talks about all of the changes in social media, and it gets really down into the dirty, nitty-gritty of how these social platforms work. So listening to him and meeting him in person when I visited New York City was so, it helped me learn so much, because, you know, when I started this page, I didn't know what I was doing.
Love it, love it. Those are really solid recommendations. Top 3 software tools that you can't live without.
Oh gosh, Google Analytics, tick. Canva, tick. And then, third one, I think that Elementor I couldn't live without. It's a
WordPress plugin.
word page. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. How do you ticket your events? Do you use a event ticketing platform like Eventbrite or?
No, we did for a long time. I ended up getting a little bit frustrated with all of the ticketing platforms out there, because even if you're not for profit, they still take money from the gross sale. And so I was thinking to myself, I'm just going to build one. So we use one through CBRGales.com.
Okay, nice. That's awesome. Top 3 mantras you try to live by.
Gosh, my first one's just follow your nose. Like, you don't need to have this plan of what you want your life to look like, because things are very fluid, especially in 2020. So follow what you love, is number one. The second one is, I think I mentioned this earlier, if you're trying to figure out what you want to do with your life, if you figure out what it is you want and then what is the best thing for everyone else, you will be successful. And then finally, I don't know, a third mantra. It's hard. It's very hard. Follow your gut. Gut feelings are real feelings.
Yep, love it, awesome. And then top 3 people you follow or study, and why?
You know, I knew that this was going to be asked. There's so many people that I admire in this life. Recently, I met Kim Rubenstein here in Canberra, and she is the co-director for the 50/50 Foundation at the University of Canberra. And she was one of the first people that I met who embodied leadership in like her own feminine sense. And I was so impressed by that, because leadership has been a masculine thing since time started, but Kim is her own kind of warm leader that makes you actually like, she's a transformational leader. So she makes you want to do that thing that she does, because she's so in it herself.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely follow Kim Rubenstein. People. One of my mom, probably.
Yeah.
Andrea Cheney, shout out, in Florida. And then finally, who shall I pick last? At least for today. I might have to pick Tim Ferriss. I'll probably be embarrassed by this later. I love Tim Ferriss. I always have. There's a couple of things that we don't always agree on, but
Yeah.
I think he is unapologetically himself, and I'd like to be a bit more like that too.
That's true. He likes to experiment with like different weird herbs and stuff like that, doesn't he? Is that I always mix up. There's this sort of group of people who do awesome stuff, but then do borderline stuff that I don't necessarily agree with, that I lump in as one group, because yeah, they like to experiment on their body and do stuff that I don't have the luxury of doing. So
Nice to watch from afar.
exactly. Just watch and just go, cool, that's happening to them, not to me. I'm okay with that. Awesome. Once again, Ray, thank you for your time. And yeah, all the best with Canberra Gals.
Thanks so much, Jermaine. This was super fun.